Greetings and welcome. In this video, I want to give you some reasons to read When Science Meets Religion by Ian Barbour. This book is a classic, and I hope it might help you better understand how science might meet religion. So Barbour developed this 4-point typology, or 4 different ways how science might meet religion, by defining these 4 ways as 1, conflict, 2, independence, 3, dialogue, and 4, integration. So these 4 different ways of how he understood science might meet religion. The first is conflict. And when you think of conflict, a person of faith might see a person of a more deterministic or materialistic view being in complete conflict, in complete disagreement with ideas of faith. And that might be a conflict where these 2 different worlds don't work together. But it could also be a person that's secular or materialistic or deterministic might also see a person of faith as in complete conflict with their worldview. So it can really go either way. So that's the first of the different views. How science might meet religion could be in complete conflict, where whatever you believe and whatever I believe are just 2 different worlds and also in complete conflict. Which really leads to the second one of his typology, which is independence. And the person that really describes independence probably most thoroughly is Stephen Jay Gould, who wrote in his book Rock of Ages about non-overlapping magisteria, sometimes known as NOMA. And basically in this independence view of how science might meet or not meet religion is that these are really 2 different worlds. That science is a language in and to itself, it makes good sense. But if you look at the world, the magisteria, the kingdom, or whatever you would like to call it, that world of theology, that the rules of that, God's rules, make sense within that world and not in a world of science. So Stephen Jay Gould is describing non-overlapping magisteria in the sense that there's this independence. There is complete separation. They might make sense outside of each other, not necessarily in conflict, but separately they make sense. So that's a second way of seeing how science might or might not engage religion, independence. A third way is dialogue. Now, dialogue is when there might be some disagreement. When people come together, they might be from very different perspectives, in the sense that a person of faith might be dialoguing with a completely secular atheist, but we can learn from one another even with our major disagreements. So how science and religion may meet in that sense is in dialogue, where we take bits and pieces from here and there. One thing for people of faith that is encouraging in this sense is Psalm 19, where it talks about the heavens are full of the glory of God. So thinking about scripture, talking about the heavens draws people of faith sometimes to dialogue with science to think more scientifically. The fourth way that Ian Barbour talks about how science and religion might engage one another is complete integration, where some of us think of natural theology, of really looking at the world through the eyes of science, that there is much more integration, that science can teach us about theology as theology might also teach us about theology. This is another different way of engaging science and religion. So those 4 ways. What are some of the critiques of this system? Well, the first critique, even though this is probably the most famous typology, these 4 different ways of seeing how science might meet religion, the first and largest critique is that Barbour himself actually had a blend of them, that he didn't necessarily have just one very specific view himself of how science might meet religion, but he took a bit of these different 4 and used that as a way of how he understood it. So if you develop a system, but also engage it in a way that is a bit confusing and not quite as clear-cut, that can be a little bit more challenging for people. So a question you can put in the comments or for yourself is, do you think of yourself as coming to this question specifically in one category or another? Maybe not. I'd love to hear from you about that. Another critique is that Elaine Howard Eklund, she did some of the largest resource in one of her books called Science and Secularity, that she basically, she talks about how different people engage science with their different backgrounds. And people of faith, even if you're working in academia, it might be independent in the sense that in academia, oftentimes people are working with scientific language, but if they are people of faith, they might be bringing their theological concepts into the laboratory by being kind, by being joyful, by being people of integrity. So even if it's not something where people are sharing their faith, it very much informs their way of engaging science. So it might be something that might be seen as independent, but when we really think about how we might think these different worlds might be independent, people bring their faith where they are. And as a critique, people that don't have any faith whatsoever, if there's no ethical lawgiver, that if people are doing science, they might not have the same kind of ethical values if they don't feel as if there is a God that is instructing them and watching over them in the sense of people that faith might have. So there are some examples really on both sides that really challenge the idea of real independence. So these are just some of the critiques of the system, but it can be helpful. It can be helpful to us to better understand how science might meet religion. There are other typologies out there. Hot is another. There are others that are thinking about how these things might interrelate or not relate. This YouTube channel really draws on dialogue, and even if we disagree, I think there is a lot of area where we can agree, that we can learn from one another. So my preference is really for dialogue, and that sometimes there are some negative comments on the site. How can a person of faith draw together science and religion? I would just challenge us that even in our really substantial disagreements, that we can really love one another and learn from one another, and that we don't have to be in absolute conflict. We don't have to hate one another to really talk and to learn. So I hope you learned something from this, and I appreciate you being here. Take good care.